episode 157, Healing from Spiritual Abuse.
You're listening to Transformed You with Mark and Melissa DeJesus.
You have arrived at the place of healing, transformation, and freedom for your life. Transformed You, where your heart will be empowered to overcome and your life will never be the same. And now, your hosts, Mark and Melissa DeJesus.
Good day to all of you. Hope you're having an excellent day. Thanks for joining us. We want to get into some great stuff today to help you on your life and journey. This is Transformed You, where each and every week our goal is to equip you in the power of God's love so that you can live the overcoming lifestyle.
That's right, everyone. It's our desire that as we share our heart, that we help you with healing to your heart and grow in the power of fruitful and restored relationships.
That's right, and we want to thank you all for tuning in. And real quick, before we get into today's episode, I want to remind you that this show is supported by listeners and those who donate towards the work. And this is really a big aspect of our calling, a major part, which is communicating transformative living, being authentic, and doing the best we can in our vulnerabilities and the insights God's given us to help create a revolution in people's thinkings and a renovation in people's lives to rebuild, restore, and help build up what God wants to do in your life. And so we ask that you consider supporting that. You can do it on a monthly basis. You can do it one time. We thank you for the generosity and consideration of that. We are going to be, in these summer months, we're actually going to be taking the month of August as a time of sabbatical. Sabbatical is a little bit different than a vacation. Some people think of it as a vacation, but really it's a more dedicated time towards what I will be doing is working on some writing projects. You are going to be working with me on those. Mm-hmm. We're also going to be taking some time to be away at out of town to have a different location where we can be able to do that. We're going to be down south for a little bit, but we are going to be doing some episodes that are very important that we've been praying about for a long time. So we ask that you consider donating towards this work, towards what we're going to be doing, and it really helps us with the show and also upcoming episodes that we're going to come back with in the fall. You can also consider our sponsor, which is Audible, and it's a great resource. If you go to markdejesus.com/Audible, you will be able to get a free trial use, and you can get one free book. So one I would highly recommend is God Loves Me and I Love Myself, which so many people have given us great feedback and what they've gotten out of it. So thank you for joining me today. I think that today's subject is one that we're going to take some time to delve into. It is difficult. It is not an easy one, but it's one that we've been praying about, I would say, for probably at least a year.
Yes, having conversations about it.
To get into this subject needs to be addressed in a way that is unique to who we are. We've done a lot of research, we've done a lot of talking with people, we've done a lot of reading, but we've witnessed the area of spiritual abuse, and it is one that we need to start talking about and we need to be aware of because it's a term that is becoming more and more aware in people's lives. In fact, one of the biggest issues that comes our way has to do with the subject of spiritual abuse. In fact, masses of people are coming to get help from us or from other people because of what they've experienced from someone in church or ministry, be it a spiritual leader, a pastor, or someone who's influential in their life. And for many years, people have wandered with deep woundedness. And many times they're like, they can't seem to identify, like what's wrong with me? What's going on? I'm depressed. I can't seem to. And when you trace it back to a church ministry kind of scenario where they carry deep lacerations and emotional wounds that have not been healed. And worse yet, they often carry that into the next fellowship they join. So new layers and layers and layers. Now, everyone gets hurt. We have to understand that. We have to lay that out. And we want to very respectfully address this subject. We do not want to dishonor anyone, but we also want to lay out and help expose this monster in a fruitful way where people can get help in their journey. Because we'll all get hurt, but abuse, spiritual abuse, as we're going to term it, is a whole different kind of monster because it's perpetual, it's continual, it's insidious, and it's often very hidden in how it operates. And so people can become slowly worn down to the core, and they're struggling to identify. And we've often had to help people maneuver through this factor. And I think one of the biggest reasons, there's really two reasons that I want to address the subject. One is because it's becoming a major problem, major manifestation. And two, I think that we've been helping people to understand that situation is abusive. That area is not healthy. And I think that when you only know what you know, sometimes you need an outside source, an outside objective person to look at and go, this is not healthy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's really great.
And so we find ourselves in situations where we don't have like skin in the game in like a certain church or something like that. We are not pastors anymore. We've been pastors. I've spent most of my life in pastoral ministry. I am now in a different role in helping people. So when I am brought into a situation, I got no one that I need to favor or no one that I need to take aside. And so it places me in a unique and different environment, where a different posture where I look in and go, this isn't healthy. And I find that there is way too much in the church that is abusive that we've just been used to.
Right.
And we think,
it's well said, babe.
Yeah. And we think that this is the way to live, and people are they're walking so wounded, and they either go, I'm done with church, or they carry that toxicity into the next one. And one thing that I think you and I want to bring up is I don't believe spiritual abuse is just leaders to followers.
Right.
I actually think that followers can be just as abusive towards leaders in what they expect, the actions that they think they can just do and not be responsible for.
Right.
That they can say things, do things, and whatever. And then the communication is, well, leaders, we need to just stay humble. And the language that we communicate to leaders is be abused and just take it.
Yeah, and there's this like unspoken code that most, I think, congregants, church fellowships carry. The leaders have the code of don't talk, don't confront, don't speak, don't spread rumors, don't gossip. But I'm not in ministry. I don't have that code. I can follow my own code. But the pastors and leaders, they have to follow the code. Right. I'm not accountable. They're accountable to God.
Correct.
There's this unspoken code, I think, that a lot of people believe who attend church.
Totally. And I think you're nailing exactly what the problem is, because God's heart is the fathers and the sons come together, like he talks about in Malachi.
Right.
It's not just the fathers, although the father is an initiator. The son has to have a right posture. Right. And if I'm a slave, I will never hear what a father is saying.
Can you just for a quick second just give a description of what you mean when you say slave as we enter into this conversation? We've talked about it a lot, but I think it'll help just in a context. A slave
has not understood the father's love, has not understood identity, has not been fathered
disciplined
in
his
love.
Own
life. Has not. That's probably the biggest mark of true sonship, is when you've gone through a time where you've been corrected. You've experienced correction in a good way. God says you are an illegitimate child if you can't handle my correction. It's missing from the body of Christ. So you have leaders who are abusive down, and we've gone through decades of that. But what we're not also recognizing is we have people that are living as spiritually illegitimate children.
So
when correction comes, it's like, that's abusive, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I can't take that. How dare you? You're mean. Yeah.
And I think that both sides need to be humbled before God and recognize where we have contributed to the problem. Yeah. Most of the articles I read are about spiritual abuse are like all these leaders and these kind of things. And I'm like, wait a second. I've been on both sides. I've been under authority. I've also been in authority. And it's like, I find abuse at both angles.
Right.
And I'm not advocating that we tolerate that on either dimension.
Right.
Abuse is something that I've been under. We've been under. Abuse is something that
We've been accused of. Yeah.
Abuse is something that we've had to enter in.
Yeah.
I've had to deal with pastors that I've had to tell them this is wrong. This is not healthy in the best way possible. I love you, but this needs to change. Some have responded well, some haven't. This is very, very messy. My history, I want to talk about this a little bit to give some backbone to what we're talking about and kind of establish some street cred regarding this regarding this subject. The first sign of it I saw in my own life was my parents. My parents worked and were very involved in a church, and there was a massive church split. And a lot of it came out of authoritarian abuses. And you have people that have volunteered, served their lives. When you are involved in a church, you give of yourself. You give sometimes 20, 40 hours a week, sometimes people do. You're not paid, you're not compensated. You're just doing it out of just love for God and service to Him. And then a hammer comes down, control and manipulation. My parents, I watched them move on from a church. I was about 9 years old. And I was going through my own transitions and struggling with my own identity and made some changes. Fortunately, we were able to land in another church that I was able to feel fruitful in. But I watched the pain of that and how it often remained, and it affected other areas that my family went into.
Because I think the one thing before you continue that I want to drive home when it comes to the hurt and pain in this is that church is a family. And we get heartbroken and we carry these wounds because church is meant to be the real true example of family.
In fact, let's look at this biblically. The family of God is, in essence, a greater priority than... I don't want to... I want to watch my words because I'm not saying it's more important than our physical families, but when we go to heaven... it's no longer, we're not married to each other.
We're not married, Mr. and Mrs. DeJesus.
We're married to Christ. We are now married to Christ. We are that family now, the sons of God, all that kind of stuff. So, when you're in the family of God, it's so vulnerable.
Right, totally. Right.
I've watched a lot of ministry leaders when a sin issue happens or some kind of, we like to use the word moral failure, which I think is just, it's hilarious to me because it's like, it's okay to treat people, in wrong ways. It's okay to have bitterness. It's okay to have massive control issues. But once, a pornography issue comes up or adultery, like, okay, now we have the moral failure.
Right.
But anyways, you get what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's often very abusive in how that's handled.
Right.
I don't see that handled very well. It's so difficult. And again, you have two parties. You have a person who has an issue like a ministry leader, and then you have those who are either called in or who are involved in the restoration. Both need to work well together. I've seen where, I remember one situation I was involved in where the person caught in an adulterous situation didn't respond to a restoration process. Was like, I'm out, I'm doing my own thing.
I'm getting a divorce, I'm done,
So then those helping are made to look bad.
Right.
And then I've also seen where like the most uncomfortable thing for me to watch is the awkwardness of like how we deal with these things like it's like a dirty sock.
Right.
Like, okay, so no one has confidence to go in and go, okay, let's address brokenness. Let's help you. Let's circle the wagon. So people get, once you have that certain failing, we worship people in authority, these great speakers and leaders. And the moment they mess up, we just shove them right off the cliff rather than going, God, I humble my heart. That very same issue could happen in my own life. God, I pray for them. I'm going to make sure that I honor the person, even though it's wrong what happened. And I also want to pray for those involved and those affected. Yeah. I think that churches can be very abusive when a ministry leader moves on. And this was difficult for us because when we got married, I left a staff position I was on for 12 years, and the leadership we had some differences, but the main thing is I knew I was moving on to other things. I just knew it. There's no question. You knew that when you were getting married to me, like there was a new path God was taking me on. And we worked those things out. But the people, so many treated me as a leper.
Yeah.
And that was
very hard. Again, going back to my sentiment of family, these people had you in their home, broke bread, expressed words of love. And as soon as, we've often joked sometimes that churches can treat you like the movie The Firm. When you're at the Tom Cruise movie, The Firm, when you're in, you're in. When you're out, that's it.
Right.
Head chopped off. How dare you? You've betrayed us. There's no celebration of, wow, what are you moving towards? This is amazing what you're growing in.
Yeah.
There's no celebration of that. It's seen as a betrayal. And that's how we were treated from a lot of people, as we are betraying them.
Yeah. And it's incredibly hurtful. It's something that you're spinning in like these emotional ups and downs. You don't even know how to make sense of it. It took some time to go, wow. You mentioned the movie The Firm. It's a great example because churches can often move into, and I was one of them. So I want to confess that. I was one where it's like, I only thinking about what I'm doing in my church. I could care less about that church. I could care less about that ministry. I care less about you unless you're involved in what I'm doing. That's set up for abusive cycles. And it's something I had to repent of, and something that I've had to let go of and recognize. But I find that churches have a very hard time with ministry leaders who move on. They establish certain patterns. I understand their reasoning, but certain like protocols of like, don't talk to them once they leave.
Yeah.
And why are they doing that? Because people have left and then created like divisive, toxic
divisions, divided the church
by staying in touch with the old people.
Yeah.
And not respecting, that arena. So now we have these things where it's like, they're gone, you're out of here. And here's the problem. Here's the biggest problem of all of this, is that people can't look at a situation, take a step back and go, wow, that it's too bad it had to go like that, but I get that person had to move on.
Right.
Or, hey, you know what? Maybe it's just time to, I don't see churches where they go, we got some disagreements on how to do things. How can we find a great way to move on? It's like, you're a false teacher. You're in false doctrine. You're like, oh my. Like we throw these things, or you don't see things the way we do, so you're automatically a false teacher. I remember that, when I left and moved on, there was a pastor who painted a whole trail in the region that I was teaching stuff that I never taught.
Right.
And he never met with me, never asked me, never talked to me, never read my materials, never listened to anything I taught, and was saying all these things and poisoned people.
Yeah.
And not one ever had a conversation with me, say, hey, what do you believe?
Right.
Because anyone who sits and talks to me, they
goes, wait a minute, that's not what we heard.
Correct.
And I think the thing that is kind of encompassing in this conversation is that because a lot of leaders they have their own brokenness, they struggle with their own insecurity and rejection. What happens is, instead of saying, how can we have fruitful relationship in the letting go of somebody, it's, I'm going to come in with control. And, we even experienced people that said, leadership pulled me aside and said, I'm going to be removed as a deacon if I fellowship with you. So fear and control is put on to say, don't dare you, because really they're insecure about the fact that people loved you and maybe would have moved, whatever, which that's not what we did. We did not divide a church and, all that stuff. But it's sobering as a leader and as someone who attends on how we are really executing relationship and having no fear in that relationship, no control in those relationships. And what does it look like to really fruitfully be in the body and encourage those with gifts and encourage those to grow? It's, I've said this many times, and we're going to continue in our conversation today, but the church is a mess on a lot of these issues. And we need some healing, man.
What breaks my heart? And I know that when you do what's right before God and you live with integrity, in the end, integrity is right.
Yeah.
And in the end, God honors it. And in the end, like Joseph, lived with integrity, even though he went through all these, crap scenarios. what is difficult is in the meantime, gossip seems to have the upper hand. So gossip drives church culture. So if you go online and look up any name of a well-known person, what is collected at the top is the gossip about the person.
Right.
That's the narrative. And that's sad to me because it ruins lives. It paints the wrong picture. Now, in the end, God's, integrity wins. You do what's right no matter what. But that doesn't mean that if you do what's right, that the narrative is going to align itself.
Right. That it doesn't equate. I wish it did, but it doesn't equate.
I remember many times saying to people, if only you knew the real story.
Right.
And you just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But
which is hard.
Yeah.
Because we've come through a lot of these situations, and I can fully admit I haven't been the best because I've wanted to defend myself. Totally. And then in defending yourself, it just gets worse and yucky. And then you feel yucky, and then you leave the person and you're going over the story and you think, oh no, I should have said this and I should have told him this. And it just, and at the end of the day,
it hits to one of my weak areas and one of the areas that I've had to really work through for a long time. And that's I have this mindset that if I just explain it to you,
right,
everything will be fine.
Don't we all feel that way? I knew you were going to say that. Like, don't we all feel that way? If you could just understand the story, if I could just tell you and help you understand, I'm not going to bash the other people. I want you to just understand my side. You think they're going to get it? No, doesn't happen. And you listening, that's not how it works.
And now I know why Jesus stood there and said nothing. And I know why that's often the best response, because you make it worse.
Yeah.
But that's just a handful of areas. We're just still scratching the surface because we've in the course of moving out, our ministry work for the past 11, 12 years now has been helping people to move into healthier, whole, more fruitful relationships. And that's our priority, is that the kingdom of God be manifest, that the invisible realm of who God is be manifest in our visible relationships, that I learn how to overcome and process through my relationships.
Right.
And we've gone into some of the most interesting areas. I mean, there's abusive situations, getting back to the spiritual abuse, that I want to give you the full crazy end of the spectrum. There was even a church fellowship I was involved with that began dipping into some, what I would consider to be some dangerous false doctrine about marriage, about how the home should be set up. It was more into a man becomes the dictator and the wife does whatever he says, whatever he wants, that her number one job is just to make him happy.
Yeah.
And it turned into this weird kind of thing where sex became promiscuous.
Yes.
and then women were invited in the home, then they were living in the home.
Yes.
There became harems. It was like, and clearly we
had
an
elevation of themselves as like angelic beings. Yeah.
And some of your listeners, you maybe read about it, and we're trying not to name drop and all that kind of stuff, but it was a church that,
and we had developed some sort of we were trying to develop relationship, because what's very sad in a lot of situations is a lot of these movements, churches, things start off with the most amazing anointings, with like, we found freedom within their fellowship on worship and on certain things that, we're very quick as a church to judge and say it's all evil, it's all bad. And in a lot of these situations, there is some great things that are coming out of it that makes it difficult, and is exactly why the heart is then tied in and people end up getting wounded and hurt and all that stuff. Yeah, but we did learn great things, and then it just kind of went off the rails. Yeah.
I'm not making this up. Like absolute rampant sexual promiscuity, to the point the authorities even got called in. And at that point, we weren't
involved.
We were no longer, providing any input or anything like that, because it just,
they didn't listen. They didn't want it anyway.
Didn't want it. And a lot of people were damaged. A lot of people wounded. And there were people that we had to work with to kind of help detox. Some detoxed well, others didn't. And it's when you look at the subject of false teachers and, people getting into teaching avenues, it always leads back to a root of rejection.
Right.
Because there is an area where they've not been fathered in their life. They've not had the healthy, correction in their life. They've not had that fruitful dynamic. So the rejection opens them up to isolation in certain areas where no one can speak into that area of their life, which opens them up to thinking that's not of God, that's not in the sanity of the Word of God. So, but it makes sense to them because of the isolation, and we were made to have healthy input. That's why even the gifts of the Spirit are not all piled into one person, because if you prophesy, you need feedback from someone who judges to say, hey, that was off,
right.
or that, or this, or can we work together on that? So it led to massive false teaching that got way out of control, but it started with an unresolved, and I see it every time, 100% of the time.
Right.
There is a rejection root at the beginning of this that was ignored.
Right.
So
usually a father root too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the sex thing is unfortunately a big part of the spiritual abuse profile, because there becomes control, manipulation, and then the yuck of the neediness and emotional, and people get wrapped into, or pastors are having side sexual rendezvous. They are with people that volunteer, people that work with them, even situations where the wives are fully aware of it.
Or participating, right?
Yes. And trying to keep this PG, at least PG-13 maybe, and talking about it. And people are like, how does that happen? Very easily.
Yes, very easy.
Very easily.
Trust me,
when you don't value integrity and living a whole, healthy life. If your value is success and building something awesome, you will break down. I'm no longer saying you might. I'm saying you will. Yeah. You will. And I go like this all the time, that it's like, when are we going to stop playing games and start getting real? So there's been situations like that where there's been situations where a pastor's not dealt with his issues and he's blaming it on congregants. And I've had to go, brother, like, do you notice the common denominator here is you? Yeah. There's an issue here. And I could tell in that moment, he's never been corrected.
Right. No one's ever said, hey, listen.
So I look like the bad guy.
Right.
No matter how I say it. I can say it with a smile. I can say it with love. I can say it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's like it's taken the wrong way. We've experienced abuse. We had ministries, a ministry come and attack us personally. I mean, heavy duty people we thought were friends out of nowhere. There was no room for listening, no understanding, just attacks, accusations, false accusations, a complete inability to go, hey, we want to talk through this. We were left dumbfounded. Yeah. Like this is insane that this exists in the body of Christ. Yeah. The control that came at us at hyper speed. I'm not talking about you could say, we even had somebody that was in on the conversation with us to give us feedback, to go, is this crazy? And it was so ungodly that we've still had to process through.
Oh, big time.
That this exists.
Yes.
The behind the scenes of things, there is this kind of operation.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's, I've had to, just to be really transparent, because this episode could take a million different directions, and we want to be sensitive to those listening, share our stories, but also share the hearts that we've had, our own hearts of having to be healed in a lot of this stuff. Yep. I could actually get a box of tissues right now over that situation, because it was so hurtful to have people that you feel that you are building relationship with that have communicated in blanket words, we whatever you need, we're here for you. Yeah. And then to come with extreme control. No, this is how we're going to talk to you. This is the scenario. This is what we're going to, and then come sideswipe you in accusations.
Well said.
And I think there are people listening that can probably relate, with some things that you've probably been through, is very, very, very hard. In any relationship, that is hard, to just get completely sideswiped, thinking you're going into a situation. I had a situation not that long ago with someone that I know, where I went to a meeting with somebody, got my coffee thinking we're on the same page, we're going to have this nice conversation, and double guns came out at me. and you're so taken off guard. You know, that's the process of how do you recover from that? Because I think we're going to get into this later on in the episode, that it's actually traumatic and abusive. And I'm using the word trauma first because we had to come to terms with understanding that we had been traumatized.
Yep. Spiritual abuse is traumatic.
It's traumatic. And a lot of people are walking around with a lot of PTSD symptoms.
Sure.
You know, we can laugh about it, but we've had to come to, we've had people say to us, you're manifesting PTSD. You're manifesting being traumatized.
Yeah.
Coming out of pastoring, coming out of, you know, the stuff we did when we left our church, you know, years ago, of real horrible wounds that come out of nowhere and literally just punch you in the gut. And I feel like I'm even, you know, as we're talking, I'm hearing people like, amen. Yes, I get that. Yeah. You know, so, but I think to as we're finishing that one specific instance is that it mirrors back to your conversation on what ends up happening. And we've been sobered on our own journey with this to not become isolated. And that's what we see a lot of ministries and people doing, is you get so focused on the ministry work and you have these stories that you're kind of piled on of people you're helping. And then you just start to become, this is the way to do it. This is my way. It's the only way. My way's the right way. My theology's the right way. And you become insulated and isolated. Yeah. And it breeds and gives room for thoughts to come in that just really aren't of God.
And it becomes hard for us sometimes to even just develop regular friendships because then you know, it gets pulled on from us to help these toxic scenarios. And of course it's part of who we are and the grace in our lives. But sometimes we just want to sit back and talk about, you know,
Netflix.
Yeah.
Or you watch it on Netflix.
Yeah. Or your favorite TV show or, you know, how's the weather, you know,
just like normal life.
And that becomes difficult. I think that, you know, we've also witnessed a lot of scenarios where money, building campaigns, become a highly manipulative, controlling environment. Because what happens is, you know, in the scriptures, we see a grace of God in works from the Old Testament, even the New, of money coming together, resources coming together. What you don't see is the tactics and strategies and all these things. And I have to be honest, I really struggle with that. And I understand in business, you have to understand some things in business and presenting your product well and helping people, because at the end you want to, you know, serve people with your product. But it's tricky when it comes to these like building campaigns, because there's strategies, there's tactics, there's techniques, and you know, we've even seen scenarios where it's like, you know, this is what God is saying and this is what he said. Well, then that didn't come to pass. It was kind of like, well, God knew that he, even though he said it, he knew it wouldn't happen. So this is what he really meant. And everyone in the audience is like,
yeah, you're right. God. And then you're like, wait, let's break this down. So God told you a lie to manipulate a bank to give money, but knew the money wouldn't come in so that you could get the loan. Like, there's scenarios that we've heard that, and people in the churches are going, yeah. So then you have to remember, as a leader, like, you're transferring that mindset. You are the example. And so people think, well, that's okay. And it's okay that goes on.
It conditions people to, like,
thank you. It's a good word, conditioning.
To make up stuff that they hear from God.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're meaning to make it up, but it's like whatever thought comes to their mind, like, yeah, God's showing me that. So there's no like healthy witness. There's no sitting. We hunger for environment of like, here's what I feel the Lord's saying. What do you guys, you know? Because it's like, I don't want to go crazy.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel like you are the craziness that, you know, that we've seen. Right. I'll tell you one that is dangerous, that I've seen a lot of times, that is not recognized. It's not written about. It's the passive abuse environment, where people need to feel protected and nothing is done. Yeah. I remember a scenario where clearly, and when I use this term, sometimes I have to roll my eyes because people flip it around all the time in weird ways. But there was clearly what I call Jezebelic, manipulative, controlling, intimidating person in the church. And the pastor was not confronting it.
Right.
And it showed his passivity. And people, it ended up being a total fallout disaster, never confronted the issue in the way that it needed to.
Yeah.
We had to tackle that many times.
That goes on. I would say
church.
that's a big topic, I feel, when it comes to church culture today, is those things are not only are they not being confronted, they have no clue how to even do that. And then if they are confronted, it comes off as control, because when you're in an argument and you come to the table with your fists up and guns blazing, that means you're afraid, and so you wanting to take control. Okay, so fear is in the atmosphere in all scenarios. So someone that comes with guns blazing, they're in fear. So they're going to try to bully you and take the upper hand. That's never the right scenario either.
Right.
So you have one or the other going on in churches, in a lot of church culture today, and it's just breeding more and more toxic environments.
Yep.
And it's true where we're seeing this, where usually, unfortunately, the byproduct is that the pastor's wife gets the hit in a lot of these passive situations.
Yep.
She is taking the hit for a lot of these things. We've seen time and time and time and time again.
I would say that pastors' wives are probably the number one target of spiritual abuse. The expectations that are put on them, the things they hear, the things that they witness, and they're conditioned to keep a smile on, just always be happy.
Yeah.
You're kind of the mom of the house, and we don't want to ever see mom have an off day.
Right.
And she has to greet everyone properly and all these kinds of things, and keep it together. And it's abusive. It's wrong. It's disempowering. So this subject, there's a fine line between operating as a really empowered family and also where the term cult can be used.
Yeah.
I don't use the term cult a lot, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the Church of Acts and how they really operated, modern vernacular would say, oh, that's a cult.
Right.
Because cult is short for culture, which means there's a very specific culture that is unique, that is very intense, and it binds everybody together. And it's like, well, that's in Acts 2, that's people sold everything they had.
We've often joked, I'll be part of a cult. I'm fine with that. If everyone's like-minded and we're operating healthy, sure, I'll be part of that culture.
Some listeners are going, no, you don't.
But right, I'm saying, healthy.
Which leads us, let's kind of talk about scenarios we haven't been involved in. There's a popular TV show, Leah Remini came out with a book.
Such a good show.
She came out with a book, and I actually read it. I read the book that she wrote on her coming out of Scientology. I spent a lot of time understanding how people tick, and so I read a lot of different aspects of culture, not just church, but outside. And the Church of Scientology has come into a lot of big attacks.
And being exposed at a great,
And people coming out of the way that they treat people, way they control people. And that's a very, very extreme example of people who had to they were confined to
like prison camps inside,
And the reason that it makes it tricky, because you say, well, why can't you just call the police or the government? Well, there is a protection of religion around, you can have your own doctrines and your own things. And so you can say someone can leave because we don't agree with you because of our religious standards. And you can say, so it causes you to be able to hide a lot of things that the government often can't, because then it's like, oh, you're intruding our arena. And that could change down the road.
Right. We have to be very careful on what we want. Because even when I'm watching the Leah Remini show, you're thinking, feel her pain. Get the FBI involved.
Right.
And it's a fine line, because there is a lot of children. There's a lot of scenarios within that the authority should step into. Okay, that's a separate part of this. Adults are making adult decisions to enter in and be okay with taking a toothbrush and scrubbing a toilet because they're being punished because of whatever. And so it becomes a tricky thing, like you're saying, of separation of church and state, of how much do we want involved and what will be removed from us. There's going to be abuses within that it's unfortunate.
Yeah, because you say, well, you get the authorities involved in that. Well, then they'll walk into your church and say, hey.
Because someone could say they're being abusive. They were mean to me. Oh,
Or they could start intervening and go, oh, you feel this way about marriage. You feel this way about these kind of issues. And this is not
a slippery slope. Yeah.
So we don't necessarily have answers for that, but there's probably every other person that we do one-on-ones with, be it a just everyday person who maybe attends church, or maybe someone who doesn't, or someone who is bringing into like a consulting kind of situation, there's some form of a spiritual, emotional abuse going on there that they need to be healed from. There's a George Barna study, and this, there's a lot of ways this can be interpreted, but about 4 out of every 10, 37% of non-church going Americans say they avoid churches because of a negative experience in church or with church people. Now, again, that's a blanketed statement. Now, I've read a lot of books, and I'll put them in the show notes, either of this episode or next week's or the week out or whatever. But in many of the books that I read, there were scenarios the writer said this is abuse, and I'm like, wait a second, I've been in that situation. It's not that simple. There are other factors leading to that are involved. They describe some scenarios of giving, and that's a tricky subject, finances, because they say this person gave of all their money and it was to ministries that misused the money, and I stop and I go, wait a second. When someone gives, they're giving out of their heart. God will honor that, even if the ministry, like if it took the giver giving and the ministry acting perfect for God to honor giving, that there would be no cycle of blessing in people's lives.
Right.
We give. It's like giving to the guy on the street, and you give him $5. Well, he could take it and go use alcohol with it. It's like,
he could, but
he could. My response is to show the goodness of God.
Right.
So, people could disagree with that, but I find that examining the and maybe we could just get into this for a minute, is the problems with addressing this subject to begin with.
Okay.
Is spiritual abuse, I feel like, is hard to define.
Yeah.
I've read through about 7 or 8 books. I'll list them, websites. I've listened to stuff on it, and I found that the definitions are struggling to nail down, and I find people throw the abuse word around.
Totally.
I've had people throw the abuse word, and I go, man, it's tough, because really the problem is what's going on in you.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily say that. I'm trying to work with the person. I don't want to be accusatory. I'm trying to work towards that place where I can speak the truth in love. And no one wants to admit that they've been abusive.
No. It's hard.
Yeah, that's a like, oof. I also know leaders can act perfectly in a scenario, and followers can still react in very toxic ways and walk away and say, I was abused.
Yeah.
And really, they didn't follow biblical protocol. They didn't go and sit down and have a discussion.
Right.
They didn't deal with it at the root source, which is the person directly. They didn't maybe bring somebody else in, like Matthew 8. I think Matthew 18 is rarely ever followed.
Yeah.
It's usually step 1, I'm offended. Step 2, I leave. Step 3, I write a letter to all my friends, and then I talk about you.
Yes.
That's the process. And I don't know why we're like, I don't know why things are not getting better, why the church is so unhealthy. We don't follow the basic things because we are afraid to confront. We're afraid to deal with our brokenness. We're afraid to go into those places because of our hurts and wounds.
I think, too, another scenario that goes back to what I talked about in the beginning of the code of not being able to talk about things. And we encountered this a lot when it came to maybe, there being issues amongst people in the congregation or things going on where there was breaches of relationship. There's always a secret that somebody has that oftentimes the leaders know that you can't share.
Right.
This is a huge thing.
Because you're protecting.
You're protecting a person.
The brokenness of their life.
Yes. Okay. There's always a secret.
Yep.
And that becomes such a tough thing when you're a leader. When you're watching a situation and you're like, oh my gosh, if the truth could just come out, but I can't be the person that would and then because maybe you do nothing, because you can't, as a leader, you can't share that secret, there's a lot of convoluted.
When we say secret, you're not saying something that they're trying to hide.
Well, they may be sometimes, but it's not our business a lot of the time to share what that is.
Yeah, somebody may have had, something in their life growing up or something,
or made a decision, or right.
And you're trying to honor the safety of that situation.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you've got someone over here that's barking at something, and it's like you don't know the
No,
whole story.
yes.
You're not involved in it. You're not a part of the problem or the solution.
Right.
So, we need to trust. And then trust is misused. And then the leader...
Right. And that person keeping the secret manipulates because they don't want anybody. The stuff that I think that's the thing, too, that can get hard as a plight of leaders and pastors is if you would only understand what we're trying to, like, not hurt people and expose things and just work with people and its process. That's one kind of cry of my heart that I wish we could have. You can kind of cry from the mountaintops more as far as leadership is concerned. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway we'd like to encourage listeners is that can we take a step back? I'm not saying that we need to tolerate abuse in any way, shape, and form, but can we take a step back and realize that we are filled with broken people and it's at the top all the way to the bottom. The same brokenness that's in the pews, if you still have pews in your church, that is all the way at the top. We cannot create this expectation that they don't have those things.
Right.
No. They do. And in fact, they may not be dealing with it probably as much as you're not dealing with your own.
Right.
And so we need to recognize that even people who've wronged us so deeply and cut us to the core, we've had to come to a point of recognizing that's their brokenness attacking us.
Yeah.
And I'm sad. I'm sad for that. I don't want to be bitter.
Yeah.
I don't want to hold this in my life, but it's a problem and it's sad. So in kind of landing this plane, because it's going to be multi-part.
Yep.
I think that I've looked at definitions of spiritual abuse. There's one book that is kind of held in some regard in the subject of spiritual abuse. I think it's older, Healing Spiritual Abuse by Ken Blue. And he has a definition that he states, and it's this: spiritual abuse happens when a leader with spiritual authority uses that authority to coerce, control, or exploit a follower, thus causing spiritual wounds. I think that's a good start.
Yes.
But I don't know that covers it, because like you and I believe, and no one in all the books I talked about the followers being abusive towards the leaders, and then the leaders are just told, just suck it up.
Right.
Do you know how many pastors are leaving the pastorate and they're going bump church?
Yeah.
Bump God.
Yes, we've been hearing that a lot lately too. Right. Extreme bitterness.
And we had the temptation in leaving church pastoring to do the same thing.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
And we're like, no, we want to be healthy. But it wasn't easy.
No.
Because it's easy to just go, you know what? God, I love you, but I don't like your family.
Right. Which I've said. Me and God have had to brawl that out. I'm being honest. Can I just be honest, people? Yeah. I've had to brawl that one out.
I think only people that are honest are going to admit that. But I think everybody has said that.
Yeah.
Pastors have often said, I would love church if there just weren't any people in it.
Right.
And that comes out of a lot of their wounded. Okay. Here's a definition that I want to propose. And this is still not complete, because I don't think it's just leaders, even though we're going to talk a lot about how leaders can create spiritual abuse environments. When we misuse someone for our own benefit, or we misuse someone for our own protection, we want to, we want to control somebody, we want to manipulate someone because we want to protect ourselves, or we want to benefit. So I'm going to attack you at the benefit of me, or this is something I've not heard. We do nothing to protect someone when we have the ability and authority to do so. Spiritual passivity, I think, is one of the deadliest plagues hitting the world. It's when something abusive is happening and someone does nothing. It's the biggest problem people even have with God, right? What's the big narrative people have with God? God, when I was abused, where were you?
Right.
Why
you
didn't
let
you
this
do
happen?
It?
You let me fall.
Why? Because people were designed to represent, fathers were designed to represent God, and fathers are being passive. Mothers were designed to represent the heart of God's heart. And there's passive, where they watch the alcoholic in the house. They let it happen. They don't step in and say, this is wrong.
Right.
We're not calling out sin. And now we live in a world where we're so afraid to call out sin, because if you say this is wrong, this is sinful, you're unloving, you're abusive, you're a hater.
Right.
And I'm sorry, it's wrong. And what we do is this spiritual abuse often involves the misuse of our influence.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you're a leader or not a leader. If you're in a church, you influence people.
You can, if you're a church, you're a churchgoer and you influence one person with your words. We all know this, right?
That's right.
They tell another person. They tell another person. Boom. You cause a split in 1 month. Done.
So we misuse our influence. We misuse our words. We misuse our relational capacity.
Yeah.
And so we really feel this is a very big problem, and we need to start moving towards health. And I think we've mentioned, why is this so devastating?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, because our spiritual interactions with church leaders, with people, brothers and sisters, is probably the most vulnerable place that exists in the world.
Right.
You know, let's just, even down to people who are Catholics and they go to a priest. You know,
Right.
what are they telling him? The most intimate, fearful things. The Bible even says, confess your trespasses one to another, that you may be healed. God designed it to be healthy, but it's vulnerable. Church is a family. We develop our most intimate connections. I would say even more so than biological family.
Yeah.
Because
At times,
because
definitely right.
biological families typically don't touch the deep subjects. They always stay shallow.
Yeah.
They avoid pain. Whereas in church, we tend to bring out those vulnerable places. We talk about hurt, and we surrender the dark, deep, intimate affairs of our life to someone. And when that relationship becomes toxic or people misuse that, it can become very, very destructive. So this is a launching point.
Yep.
Because we want to create a dialogue on this subject. I'll come back in the next episode, mention the resources, but I'll also reference them at the show notes of this website. And I want to close by saying this. I would like to offer a teaching training course on recovering from and healing from spiritual abuse. But I'm at a point right now where I would need to hear from people that they would want that they would want it. We're going to discuss a lot of it in these episodes, but that's something that you would want. I don't know how we're going to structure it. It'll definitely be an online course. It would be a place for feedback. I've had a lot of people write to me in very, very toxic, spiritually abusive scenarios. Yeah. And I'm very passionate about creating a resource with just some practical references on how they can heal, how they can renew. If you would like to make access to that, or maybe you're listening to this, it's in the archives and it's way later and you've come to this and you're like, I want this, send me an email at Mark, M-A-R-K, at markdejesus.com. Send me an email to that address and just say, I would like to be put on the list to be made aware of this resource. And we want to make it available. We're going to talk about this again. This is only the first part. Yep. We're going to talk about it again and come back to this. But we wanted to first kind of lay the foundation and get ourselves going, okay, I think the takeaway is I need to recognize when I'm in an abusive situation.
Yeah.
And God, I need to, first of all, set myself up to get some healing in it and make sure this doesn't stick with me to
then be part of the problem too, because of the wounds that we're carrying.
And to defile other people.
Yeah.
I don't want to defile people with my hurt and with my pain, but it still doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore this. I need to get help. I need to get healing. So that's about as far as we can go right now.
Yeah.
We'll come back in our next episode. And we pray this has been a blessing and a help to maybe illuminate and cause some relief that, okay, I'm not crazy. I've been under some stuff that I need to heal from. So God bless you guys. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. That's all the time that we have for today, folks. We pray this message and this episode has added value to your life. So go live healed and free.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transformed You. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends, comment on our site, and consider supporting future episodes by going to markdejesus.com. Until next time, take your peace in the love of God.